Okay, so today is April the 7th, 2014. I am online with Justin Lincoln. Hi, Justin.
Hi there.
Thanks very much for participating in my study about social media and artists. And we'll just use these 7 basic questions as approved by my ethics board to ask somebody. If you feel you're in danger or anything, just let me know. Um, and it was a very interesting process, believe me. So I'll ask the first question. As an artist, can you describe for us some of the concerns or some of the directions that your practice is concerned with?
Sure. Well, one thing that really interests me lately is how do we uh, humans start dealing with this huge influx of information and data that's now available to us because of online networks. I feel like I think about this a lot as an artist because I think that for much of human history, information seemed to be at a premium, that people would have to track down and spend so much time and energy to find particular kinds of information. And many people didn't have to deal with information surplus. And now I think we are inundated with it. And plenty of that information could be faulty information. It could be information that's full of noise. And I think that now that we live in an age where information isn't at such a, there's not so much scarcity, we need to also realize that that information that is available is also atomized. It's spread all over the place. And I think one of the things that we learn to do as artists and as intellectuals, as thinkers, is to take those bits and pieces of information and combine them in new and hopefully meaningful ways.
Yeah, when I was looking at your videos and your blog mix videos, it was occurring to me that I wasn't just looking at an artist who was using social media as a platform or using it as a structure, as an installation space, even, but someone who was using social media as the material for the work.
Right?
I mean, if I don't know, this sounds strange, but it was an abyss filled with content, it would look like your work. And I don't know if it's some sort of Gestaltian effect, but as I was watching it, it seemed to make sense to me. There seemed to be some codifying of all this information. It was very painterly in a way, and I'm not sure how much of that was deliberate or whether we're supposed to think about how much of that was deliberate. But I couldn't help but just get this pattern or this sense and this groove. And after a while, it almost didn't feel like it was too atomized. It felt like it was a coherency was coming through it. Does this make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. I mean, I know that content-wise, um, amongst other things, I do end up bringing a lot of images of paintings into the work and a lot of other artists' work. But I guess one of the my first blog mix, I guess, happened sort of by accident. I was just sort of goofing around, and I was curious about the sort of patterns of my own archive. Most of the images are in a section of my Tumblr called it's my likes, and occasionally you'll see a little heart or something floating in that mix. And if I posted everything that I quote unquote liked, there would be such a flood of my posts that I feel like I'd probably lose the majority of my followers. And to be honest, I'm not even sure that I'm comfortable sharing all of that within the feed of my actual content. This is almost like a runoff of the content. And it's also complicated by the fact that a lot of the images that are in there or the text, it's not as straightforward as a simple like. And I think a lot of people, when they're responding online or working online and they use likes, they often don't really mean like. It's just an acknowledgement that something has been a blip on their radar. Everything in my likes is not something that I fervently like. There may even be some things in my likes that I don't really like, or I like ironically. There are many types of liking. But I nonetheless was kind of curious if I started running them together, if I started speeding through that, what would it look like? And then I started bringing screen capture software into it, and the blog mix is what it looks like. I also think that they have a relationship to structuralist film from the 70s, where these these film montages were these artists like Hollis Frampton and Paul Sharits they were exploring what happens in film if you dispense with narrative and story, and you have less of a focus on that, but you're not necessarily doing the another artist that was doing something like that was Stan Brakhage, but he still had a sort of poetics about it. And I think that the structuralists really wanted to find out what happens if you simply move to moving images as one image after another. And what happens if we see one image after another? But I think that for a lot of us that spend a lot of time online, that's our daily life. We're seeing one image after another, almost like a film montage.
And does it feel like it was going to become too much, but it ends up it just wasn't as much as you thought it would be, and you could use more?
Well, I don't know. I think that because there's a stroboscopic effect, I think for a certain kind of person, it already is too much. And I know that based on different moods I might be in, time of day, circumstances, sometimes I can only deal with watching them a certain amount, and sometimes I find it almost meditative.
Right.
Sometimes they're stimulating, sometimes they're meditative. A lot of that can be connected to external factors, I guess, as well as sort of bodily factors and our own sort of constitution and interest. One of the best interpretations of what I was doing when I first started sharing these was actually from Curt Cloninger. And he mentioned to me that it seemed to him that the blog mix is very much about reading. And, biographically or autobiographically, that makes a lot of sense for me. I'm a huge bookworm. And, but, my reading habits extend outside of that to any other kinds of media. I'm just a voracious consumer of media. But I don't really think that's not a passive thing, this consumption of this media. I mean, what can be more active than shoving your eyeballs and your mind full of ideas and images? And eventually it has to come back out.
It seems like you're very conscious of your relationship to social media or to the content on social media at any particular time. And so we're kind of bleeding into question 2 here about how you describe your artistic utilization of social media. And I think we've been answering that. But the act of, say, liking, or the act of ignoring, collecting, using, this is part of your practice with social media. Is that fair?
Yes, and I would say that in the blog mix, if you watch enough of them and if you look at the dates, you'll see a lot of topical images or news stories or things like that, as much as painting or art-related materials might find their way in. A lot of sort of journalistic news stories and images from the news will find their way in. And one of the things that sort of fascinates me about using Tumblr is to watch the sort of recurrent patterns of and cycles of a given image or story or post. You know, sometimes something that was popular 5 months ago, all of a sudden, after 5 months, you see 5 new people post it. And you don't know exactly why, because it travels in these strange flows on the social network. And I mean, I also have this kind of strange hyperbolic fear or fantasy about Tumblr that, you know, because so much of Tumblr is based on content that is sourced outside of the network, that, you know, could there come a day or a time where Tumblr gets shut down? And what would that mean in terms of the sort of archive of images, stories, writing, and also the relationships that people have formed through something like that? So, I mean, I have the blog mix is a very strange sort of archive because it's not an archive that stands still.
A lot of what you're saying is, and again, I guess I'm thinking about this in physical terms, but I mean, it seems like a very helicopter or jet overview of what you're dealing with. It's almost, I guess not quite, but almost like a political economy kind of like view of art and culture content and the people pushing it back and forth. You know, if that makes sense to say. You know, and I guess the archiving is a huge concern. I mean, our I can't help but feel like our act of using Tumblr is very temporary. This won't be here, or even if it was here, it would be so dense and so full of content. How would anyone possibly, you know, engage with it? And I think your videos, your blog mixes, are one sort of maybe critique or solution approaching that problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if they're a solution or just a further problematizing
Right.
of that situation. You know, I'm not sure that, you know, as artists, it's our job necessarily to solve problems. You know, we identify and we often make more of them. I mean, I'm also really taken by this thing. I might be misquoting him, but I think it was Marshall McLuhan who said something about how, you know, what interesting things happen when you brush information against other information. And I feel like that's as much as it happens in my blog mixes. It's what everybody who's interacting together on Tumblr is doing.
Right. And Marshall McLuhan, you know, was nearby in Toronto, so that's it was very exciting for me. I got to meet his daughter last year,
Yeah.
which
Is there still? Do they still have like an institute or any kind of family business?
I don't think so.
Because I think his son Eric had done some writing, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's a really interesting figure who's fallen in and out of fashion over the last few decades, but I think he had some very interesting ideas.
Yeah, yeah. I suspect he'll be back again. We probably haven't heard the last of him. So, question number 3: how does the idea of collaboration apply to your practice on social media?
That's an interesting question. I think often the collaboration is I feel like when I collaborate on Tumblr, a lot of it is rather external to something like a blog mix. I think there are certain people um, who whose blogs feed both my artistic content and my ideas and my discourse. Um, and I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who writes in the book Cat's Cradle about this idea called a karas. Now, karas is like these people who seem to, like, even if they don't see each other in years, like, they so speak each other's language that it's as if they could just pick up the conversation from there. And I feel like there's something a bit like that with some folks on Tumblr, in particular folks like the gentleman that does prosthetic knowledge.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, he's such an interesting figure in that field.
yeah. He was good enough to reply to my email about this study as well,
Good.
and he shot off some uh, very interesting links and recommendations.
Good.
Um, it's a very mysterious, wise figure. And I guess I've been following him around the same time I've been following you as well, over the last 3 or 4 years. So, um, yeah, I'd like to keep, well, I'd like to meet him as well. So
Uh-huh.
this study was a good chance to try to make that happen. Are there, speaking of prosthetic knowledge, are there other artists and movements via social media that you feel are important to the contemporary art industry? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a number of them that are sort of underserved by the contemporary art industry. I mean, in
hmm,
particular, both both Rich and I uh, have a real abiding interest uh, in GIFs and how they are functioning visually. Um, and I'm not. It's not that I think that GIFs need to find their way into the gallery, because I don't think that being in a gallery right now is what is going to legitimize an art form per se, especially with new media. I think that I don't know. Besides people making really interesting gifs and the sort of movements around, like other movements or people or groups that I would be interested in, I think that a lot of open source software that is being and programs that are made for artists are really central to that kind of thing. For example, like processing. Um, it's funny that while notational is the Tumblr that has gotten me into the most uh, professional discussion about art, and also helped me get a visit to MIT's Media Lab and things like that, that my most popular blog is the FY processing, which I feel like that is just like doing um, my best to help keep a movement of arts coders connected in Tumblr. And what I really like in things like processing is that it unites people who are just trying code for the first time in their life with people who are very sophisticated and working for the New York Times. And I think that that's that's really fascinating, and I wish more of the art world was like that.
yeah, I mean, for as I was telling you earlier, like your processing work really got me interested in that program, which led to my current school program and my choice of courses, which then led to Max and Jitter, which seem to be lend themselves naturally to processing as well, to create really interesting things for visual and audio creative people. So it, like a virus, it's spreading through social media. The idea of these programs. I did
Right.
find it very helpful to actually be physically working with people to try to figure out some of these programs.
Hmm.
But I mean, it led to collaboration, I guess. So
Right.
I thought that was a very very interesting opportunity generated from our little Tumblr blogs.
Right, and I think that the one of the most important things in something like processing is the network around it.
Mm, yeah, I've got friends who know how to use it, so I'll continue to bug them very much
Hmm.
about it. So, what are some of the unique advantages and disadvantages of using social media as an artistic medium?
Uh, well, I mean, I feel like the answer to that is so relative. Um, Advantages and disadvantages of using social media in terms of if you are interested in using the arts to create discourse, I think it's really useful. If you're trying to simply sell something,
Hmm.
thus far I don't see it as being so useful. I think certain people have found ways to hack that. In particular, people around Rhizome are trying to do all sorts of interesting experiments with auctions and playing games with Bitcoin and things like that. And I find that fascinating. But at the same time, it's interesting. I guess it was maybe a year or two ago in Art Forum, Claire Bishop wrote an article about why is new media so, in some ways, so absent from the international art world. Like, why is that not in the same galleries and spaces that are reported, say, in Art Forum? And she pointed out exceptions, but I think there was a certain point that was very valid that she was making. And meanwhile, of course, the new media artists kind of really wanted to hold her feet to the fire about it. They were very upset that, like, oh, she's just so uninformed, and she's trivializing what we do. But I think that you know she she makes an argument that, like, why, while artists may use the internet and computers to make art, it often that art is not really, it's not about the experience of using the technology or using the web. That it, I guess for her, it doesn't feel like her usage of that. And
Oh, I
I don't know.
see.
I mean, it was a very I don't know. It's definitely an article worth digging into.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'll definitely look that up. I feel like there's like um, maybe in about 10 years, new media artists won't have to explain that they're new media artists anymore. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
just a it's just a matter of time. We're interesting overlap of technologies and attitudes. I can still remember trying to convince people the internet was going to be useful. It's really going to take off someday. Um,
Right. Well,
so
I mean, there's also the aspect of, like, outside of the art gallery as a system for making money. There's also academia, and academia has, it comes in all sorts of varieties, and in some places, they'll understand the role of social media and why it might be important, including in art making. But of course, there's still going to be plenty of academics that won't understand why any of the things that we value matter.
yeah, and there's a bit of a gap. I'm noticing because I haven't been in school for a long time. So when I'm back at the program I'm in now, it's new media and communications, but social media is still new or completely alien. to most of the
Right.
faculty, for example, and uh, they're a little sort of unfamiliar with what the students are doing, which most of us are doing something about social media for our major research projects, for example, and for courses like this. Like this is part of an independent course I had to design myself because there was no opportunity to sort of like in any of the course they were offering to explore art and new media and social media to this extent. I don't expect that that'll be that way for long, but the fact that it's 2014 and there's still this sort of like disconnect going on
Mm-hmm.
is very interesting. Sometimes I feel like the whole world's immersed in social media and new media, but and then all of a sudden you step into another environment and you realize it really hasn't. It really isn't everywhere. It's still new to most people.
I would agree.
Yeah, it's loose perspective. But speaking of people, Justin, who is your audience? Do you think?
Okay. Well, I think that right now I'm often surprised by who my audience is. Um, I often hear about them well after the fact. You know, people that may have watched what I'm doing or been following what I've been doing for a while, and it's maybe um, maybe it takes some time to start communicating with me, even though I try to make myself available. And I think that in going to Cal Arts, one of the reasons I went to Cal Arts was that I knew that a lot of conceptual artists taught there, and I was very curious. Like, well, how do you sell conceptual art, or how do you make a living selling conceptual art, for example? And I'm not sure that I really ever got a straight answer. Though I think part of it has to do with you know you it gets caught up with your identity and who you are and who you know and who you're corresponding with, and the sort of trails of uh, sort of conversation that sometimes art takes a part in. Um, and I remember hearing a lecture. It was a recording of the conceptual artist Douglas Hubler, and he's most famous for this saying where he says that the world is more or less full of interesting things. I do not wish to add another. And I think I'm totally like misquoting him, but if you look up Douglas Hubler quote, just a beautiful thing with that basic sentiment. And anyway, he was giving a lecture where he told students it's quite possible that your audience might just be 5 people in the world. And that doesn't mean that you need to change your work just so you can get a bigger audience. Maybe those 5 people really need that thing you're making. And you won't know until a long time in the future. And I'm kind of I guess my favorite theorist is Gilles Deleuze, and he loves pulling this quote from the painter Paul Klee, and he says that the artist makes his work for an audience that is yet to come, an audience in the future, and that's maybe a very romantic notion, but I think that that's an interesting thing to aspire to in work. I kind of feel like at some point in the future, the work that I'm making now may make a lot more sense to someone in the near future or far future, even more sense than it makes to me.
It's kind of contrasts with the kind of common sensibility that social media is very here and now, like immediate, an immediate interaction. And if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, you're talking about the sensibility of patience, of making your practice, and it doesn't necessarily matter who your audience is. If you're true to your practice, the audience will the audience will show itself, or it will find the right audience, or they'll.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, that's definitely a part of it. And I do think that, endemic to a lot of social media is the aspect of something being like a message in a bottle. And you throw it out into the ocean, and hopefully it finds
Yeah.
that person that needs it.
Though, I have to admit, I mean, putting out stuff, I'm not getting crazy visitors from obscure parts of the world. It really does seem to be geocentric to mostly to the Western world, with some smatterings here and there.
Right.
But I don't know. There seems to be a promise that it's kind of not maybe fulfilled yet with with that.
Yeah, I could understand that. I mean, it sounds like, I mean, I almost feel like I'm going to start interviewing you, but this like the interest in reaching other parts of the world, and parts that, outside of your own sort of enclave. It's really interesting. I mean, one of the other kind of strange things about my work in Tumblr is that my Tumblr feed is something like at least 4,000 people, and because of that, a lot of those people, I I think they're very different from me, and those are spread out across the world. And I, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, but the other side of it maybe goes back to, nonetheless, it's people that are on social media.
Right. That's the audience. Okay. So finally, number 7, and this has been great. Thank you. Number 7, are there any other aspects to artistic practice and social media that we have not discussed and you feel is important to mention now?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have something in terms of summation, but I have been thinking since your last question about, not only is there like a gap sometimes between sending a signal out and getting a response, but there's also a difference between trying to get the greatest number of followers or the greatest number of eyes on what you're doing, or the greatest number of people. I mean, it's funny, if you go to Facebook or Twitter and things like that. Twitter in particular, people are constantly trying to pump up the numbers of people following them. And I find that really tedious, because, like, within, say, the 4,000 people that I'm following, there's still probably a core group of maybe 20 that are most informing my sort of social media lens. But I do like how, unlike something like Facebook, where Facebook sort of filters people for you, Tumblr leaves it pretty wide open. And I think that it would be better for us as artists and people to keep those filters open and not just have this kind of little filter bubble.
Yeah, I feel the same way about Facebook. I know there's people who are interesting, but Facebook doesn't think that I think they're interesting, so they don't appear in my feed anymore.
Right.
But in something like Tumblr, someone could stop using their Tumblr account, and I'm afraid maybe I wouldn't notice. Or, I wouldn't notice until a year or two from now. And hey, like all of a sudden, where is this person? Like I haven't seen anything. Come across. So I guess it is problematic. But,
Have you ever noticed someone sort of disappear and reappear under a new name or something like that?
I don't know if I'm that savvy that I would have noticed that, but have you?
I think so. I think I've noticed, in particular, some people working with with language and experimental poetry. A few people have been doing things like that. But, it's, I don't know. I mean, it seems like one more opportunity to, experiment within social networks. I mean, most people, if we go outside of uh, Tumblr and look at Facebook, I have certain friends, and I'd imagine you do too, who are constantly talking about how they're going to quit Facebook, and then they'll quit Facebook for a week or two, and then they're back, and they'll give a little progress report about their week or two without it, and it just seems so. If they could really turn that into a game, that might be interesting. But in the meantime, it's kind of tedious.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's got something to do with identity, right? Like Facebook, you're using your real name. It's a whole different um, commitment or stake than something like Tumblr. You can just have any name you want. Have you? So you mentioned earlier that sometimes you feel like you don't like or you don't present too much because you don't want to overwhelm the people in your feed. And it's making me think at the time, like, do you feel like you want to go on a whole separate thread of different content as an act of curation, I guess, and you would start up another Tumblr blog just to go off in a different direction without repercussion, I guess.
Yeah, I do that on occasion.
Okay.
But I do think that most of those kind of often peter out. They're just I don't know. I can only focus my energy in so many directions. I mean, it just I don't know. Actually, I'm curious. How many tumblers do you have?
Well, I think most of them are straw men or scarecrows at this point, but
Uh,
I guess probably about 20, 25.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I might have that too, but I a lot of mine are for given classes. Like I'll make a class
oh,
Tumblr.
right, yeah.
So I probably wouldn't count those amidst the ones that I do just out of a kind of uh, passing interest. I mean, one thing that's really another interesting thing in Tumblr is the fan culture. So that I feel like FY processing it's a fan blog, and that's fine. And increasingly at my school, I am working with students who are doing thesis projects on fan cultures, and a lot of their professors really are not very interested in it. They
Maybe,
find it very trivial, but I think my view has changed a lot because of running what are basically fan blogs.
yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe "fan's" a dirty word. Maybe it's too um, has trivial associations with it. Like you're
Yeah, I mean maybe it doesn't seem quote unquote critical enough.
right.
But I mean, criticism in my mind could be just as much a an embrace of something. Saying yes to something becomes a kind of saying no to something else, and I don't I don't know.
And why would you go on the internet at all unless you were a fan of something? Really, at the heart of it, mm, to
I
pay
don't know. I mean, I can imagine people that go on simply to troll.
because they're a fan of trolling. I mean, if you're going to troll
Yeah,
somebody, you're kind of a fan, right?
yeah,
In a way. I mean, unless you're going on to like pay a bill, I guess you're a fan of the bank. But really, it's your interest, your cultural interests, which are, I guess, maybe bringing you on there in the first place.
yeah. Well, I mean, maybe another thing going back to why academics might have some issues with that. Maybe it goes back to like um, I don't know, could go to Kant or something like this, a sort of studied disinterest as you're dealing with whether it's beauty or any other thing that you're studying, to be a professional, you're this sort of disinterested observer. And I don't buy that. I think that the more interested we can get, um, the better.
Well, it sounds like you just described lurkers, or some of the kids would say creeping. Uh,
Well, I don't know.
uh,
I think it could actually, I would say that those people are probably less interested than the people that get actively involved,
yeah.
other than griefers. But I mean, I think that I know tomorrow I'm going to see a presentation from a couple of students who are involved with cosplay,
Oh,
and
interesting.
in one of them is writing a paper where she makes an argument that cosplay becomes a kind of tool for all sorts of interactions and possibilities in life. New kinds of people that you can meet, new, you know, an excuse to learn how to sew, and all of these other things that you get put in touch with because you're a fan of something.
That sounds familiar. I got a lot of grief when I was young for playing Dungeons and Dragons, for example. But I learned a lot um, about weapons, or about what dexterity meant, or making maps, longitude and latitude, like how to like measure things, like all like it all like all these.
I like the whole alignment system that they have. I love how that's become a meme for popular culture. You'll look at any sort of like series on TV, and they'll have a character who's lawful good, utterly neutral, chaotic evil, chaotic good, all of this kind of stuff. And I was just like, wow, you know. Not only could I identify with that, but I remember as I was growing up thinking like, yeah, probably a lot of people around me probably think they are mm, lawful good or chaotic or uh, I don't know, chaotic good or something like that. But if you start looking at people through those lenses, you know, who knows where that goes?
Yeah, at least it gives you some lens, to look through.
Mhm.
Um, when you're young, yeah, and then you carry that forward. I guess role playing was a very it was more important than I initially thought. It just it got into like military training sort of like programs, and it evolved into how we like participate in games or participate with each other, and yeah, it really that little stupid little paper table game really 40 years ago kind of changed everything in more ways than we realize, I guess. But
Mhm.
that'll be my next study. Is on
Well, I mean, we're also role playing when we're in the network, when we're on social media. We're trying to present our like coolest, smartest, goofiest, most entertaining self most of the time, I think, and
uh,
it's kind of fun.
and that's making me think of Baudrillard, which is another big thing I learned about this year. So
Mhm.
we're nothing but simulacrum, back and forth.
Mhm.
It's meaningless, which I guess is the ultimate fear of social media and our interactions on it. That they're ultimately pointless. I just depressed myself. Sorry, Lincoln. Yeah, sorry, Justin.
Well,
Um,
I do have maybe a question for you. Sort of
sure.
maybe it could be off the record, or you could keep it on. It doesn't matter so much to me. But